Okay, welcome to everyone who is joining us today for the DevOps for Java Shops series. Before we get started, I welcome you to check in for today's session, details of which are on the screen. So checking in for a session gives you access to resources for upcoming sessions within the series, but also other sessions that are being run out of the reactor around DevOps and similar topics as well. So please feel free to check in for today. So today's session within this series is DevOps with GitHub, and it marks the third session out of this series. So it will run over the next 45 to 60 minutes. We are also recording this session today, so it is available to watch on demand, and it will go onto the series page. I'll share a link in that chat so you have access to that link. Do feel free to ask any questions that you have today. I will be moderating the comments section. So any questions that you have at any stage, do feel free to put them in there and we'll make sure to get you the answers by the end of the session. To quickly run through our code of conduct today. So this is a reminder to everyone who is with us to be aware of one another, friendly and welcoming throughout. It's a very inclusive environment that we have at all reactor events. So just to be aware of one another and understanding of differences of opinions that we might see throughout too. So this week we are welcoming back Brian Benz to deliver this session. So Brian is a cloud advocate at Microsoft, but also has a wealth of experience with him over the years. So really excited to have Brian back with us today. Without further ado, Brian, I'll hand over to you at this stage.
Great, thank you, Emma. How are you doing today? Oh, she's got.
Good, sorry, Brian. Good.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here. So looking forward to presenting this. So this is the third of the series. The first session, we went over DevOps in general, which is just the general topics. And I gave you a little preview of some of the demos and some of the apps I'm going to show you live. In the last session, we went over Azure DevOps, Azure Pipelines specifically, and how you do builds and releases with a multi-stage pipeline. And by the way, for those of you who watched that one, I did have a few issues with a demo, but I actually figured out what the problem was. It's always fun to debug things while I'm presenting. But I did figure that out, and you'll have to stick around to find out what the solution is. I'll share it a little bit later in this presentation. So today, the third episode in this series, we're going to focus on GitHub. So we're actually DevOps for GitHub. I'm going to give you a little intro of GitHub just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then we're going to dive into another demo which shows how you can actually take something from GitHub, a repo, and deploy it directly to Azure App Service securely. And we're going to use some variables, we're going to use some secrets, and we're going to use the feature flag manager that we used in our previous sessions. So let's get started. For this particular one, there's a couple of things on the agenda. So I'm going to review again what is DevOps. I'm going to talk about that in general. And then we're going to talk about people, process, and products. Keeping your investments as well, and then showing you DevOps in action with the GitHub demos. I also have a cool demo showing collaboration between myself and a colleague using Visual Studio Code too. So stick around for that one at the end. All right, just a moment. Get my slides working here. So just to review, we've seen this slide in every presentation. It's a great quote, and I always like to start with it because it just sets the tone for the rest of the session. Colleague of mine, Donovan Brown, has a great quote: DevOps is a union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to end users. So that means that you need people on board. Everyone needs to understand their role. You have to have a clear process so everybody understands their role within that process. And then you have products which support the process and the people and allow them to collaborate rather than just doing their little silo of work and passing things on to the next stage without understanding the big picture. It's really good, and it's really important that the people understand everything that's going on and their importance in that process during your DevOps planning and delivery. Because if you don't have the people on board, the greatest products and the greatest processes are just not going to work, or they're not going to work well, at least. So to review as well, here's some things that people in DevOps can do to share the load. When you work with applications, the dev team provides code. They're writing code. They provide a repo for the code. Sometimes the repo itself is provided by the ops team because they have some security and other things that need to be set up. And then the dev team provides unit testing and CI/CD automation because the dev team understands the application, so they have to provide the build part of the DevOps process at least, so that you understand, so that everyone understands how things get built and how things get delivered. The ops team provides DevOps tools and services, so anything to do with the platform that you're going to run your DevOps on. They provide CI/CD automation too. The dev team provides more code-based CI/CD expertise, and the ops team generally provides more ops-based CI/CD. So continuous integration, continuous delivery needs to be put somewhere, needs to be on an end target platform. That platform could be Kubernetes, it could be a web app, it could be a virtual machine, or whatever it is. The people who manage that platform for production need to be there during the process for setting up test servers, staging servers, and everything else. The runtime platform, of course, is provided by ops because they are the people who control what is put on public-facing servers as well as internal servers, and they're usually in charge of actually buying hardware or cloud capacity. And then scaling, monitoring, and security is provided by the ops team as well. So last week we talked about Azure Pipelines. On the left here we have all of the capabilities traditionally referred to as Azure DevOps, Azure boards, repos, pipelines, which are build and release pipelines, artifacts for storing your artifacts like Node or Maven based artifact package managers. To be able to keep those for audits and for rollback is really, really valuable. Also test plans for allowing you to test your websites, test load capacities, and other things like that. Today we're going to focus on GitHub. So GitHub, for those of you, most people are familiar with GitHub, but I do want to call out a few things that GitHub does provide that people don't necessarily work with. It is more than just a repository for your code. It also has actions. So actions are a way to script and control various things. Extensions are slightly different, and people ask me the difference between those all the time. So GitHub Actions are scripts that you write. They run on things called runners. GitHub Extensions are third-party code that is available through the GitHub Marketplace that allows you to do things like deploy to clouds, test your vulnerabilities for open source software, and other things like that. The third parties write. It generally integrates with another product or service, and they're available on the marketplace. Integration with popular IDEs as well, including Visual Studio Code and all the other IDEs that you're used to. GitHub provides really good coverage for that, and I'm going to show that a little bit. And last but not least, I do want to mention, so Microsoft bought GitHub a while back. It used to be, before the Microsoft purchase, that if you wanted to have a private repo, you would have to pay money for that. Public repos for free. And for teams, you also had to pay. Microsoft has opened those up so that free private repos are now free, and for individuals and teams. So you can set up a private repo for a team of a certain size for free on GitHub as well. If you didn't know about that, check it out. It's a very handy feature. Okay, so diving deeper into GitHub Actions. So you can automate pretty much anything. There are 20 project events that you can use for workflow automation. Configuration is based on YAML. I'm going to show a demo of this today. And there are global communities. So there's thousands of open source actions maintained by the community, meaning folks like yourself who want to build their own actions. You can build them, share them, and place them in the Actions marketplace to share. GitHub Actions as well. There are some pre-made ones that are ready for Azure, including these, deploying a Kubernetes cluster, Azure Web App, which is the one we're going to use today, Azure Functions, SQL deploying actual SQL or SQL script, and machine learning, so deploying a model that you already have into your Azure ML workspace is pretty cool. Other popular actions, you can run CLI commands inside of your actions. Azure Key Vault is a great way to have shared secrets that you're going to use among different applications. By the way, GitHub also has a secrets capability that we're going to highlight today because we're only sharing things in one repo. So we're going to use the GitHub secrets instead of Azure Key Vault. But if you want to have a secret, such as a connection string or something else that you wanted to share across different applications, different target environments, not just GitHub, you would use Azure Key Vault for that, which is pretty cool. And there's a lot more as well. If you just search for GitHub Actions, you'll see all the different actions available to you. The other thing we're going to show today is Visual Studio Code. It's a lightweight and powerful source code editor. It runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It has Git commands built into it. It's extensible and customizable, and it's open source and it's free. That's really important to know as well. I'll be showing you that in a little bit. Actually, I'm going to show it to you right now. So without further ado, let's go in and look at some of the things we're going to talk about today. So GitHub Actions. Just a little tour around GitHub real quick. I'm going to show that one. Actually, so we have this website called Tailwind Trader's website. And that's something we use for demos all the time. It's an e-commerce website. And I just wanted to show you this to give you an idea of GitHub, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So GitHub itself has code, of course. GitHub also has a README. The README is where you actually put the instructions for most things. The next thing you have is security. So security is a place where you put your security policies for this particular application. In the case of this one, this is a Microsoft repo. So we have in the side of the security MDs, just some processes for reporting any security issues that you might find, the preferred language that you have, and we have more details on our policy for security as well. The next thing we have is a license. So the license itself, when you create a GitHub repo, we have several licenses to choose from by default. This one is the MIT license. As you can see here, it says a short and simple permissive license. This is the entire license right here. So it just gives you a little bit of information about how this is being shared because it's a public repo. All right. The other thing we have here is some of the issues that we currently have. Some are open, some are closed. These are actually the closed issues that we had, and they've been closed by default by just timing out. But you share issues, you put them here, and then the idea is the developers will review these and hopefully put them on some kind of punch list where they'll be working on these in the future. We also have pull requests. Pull requests are here. They're listed in the order of the times that they were done. We also have branches. So branches is something like main branch. So you'll have a main branch, which is usually the branch you have for working on your repo. The next thing you have is secondary branches. For example, you can have a branch which is the next version of the application, which might be in test right now. You put that into a branch, and then you merge that with the main branch when you're done with all your tests. So you can actually have a separate working copy of the application. You're working on that branch, and then when that branch is ready for production, you merge it in. That is generally the most common workflow, but there are other workflows, whatever works for you. The whole idea here is you can branch this code and make it separate. We also have releases, and releases is just a way of packaging code together and making them a versioned release that gets shared with the public. So that's just a little bit of a tour of GitHub. We're using this Tailwind Traders website as the demo for that. But let's actually get into the demo I want to show you today, which is our DevOps for Java Shops application. As you may recall, with the application that we did last week, it's a Azure Web App. And if I click on Reactor Staging, I get this little error here, which is okay. And I go to the welcome page, and it gives me this nice little test feature flags welcome page. It's just a really simple Spring app that I've built for this particular demo. But one of the cool things about it is it's integrated with feature flags. So, I should back up a little bit and just mention, for those of you who might not have seen the first couple of sessions, this is an Azure Dashboard. I have several Azure Dashboards. I organize them by presentation because that's the way I do my work. But you can organize these by whatever you want them to be. In this case, inside of my Azure Dashboard, I have a resource group. That resource group has all of the things that I work with for this particular demo that I use this for. On the right here, I have a little markdown section as well, which provides all the links that I need for this. And this just coded in markdown. You can see it here. And it's handy for me for actually just sharing information that I want to use during my presentation. So I can show you, for example, if I want to go to that staging, I just click here and I go to the staging application and it shows that to me. Now down here, I actually have a feature manager as well. And this is outside of my regular resource group. So inside this resource group, I have everything for DevOps for Java Shops. But I also have over here a feature manager. This is Azure App Config. I use this for multiple demos in multiple places. So in this case, it's not part of my DevOps for Java Shops resource group. It's a different resource group that I use this, but I include it on my dashboard so I can find it easily. So here we go. I'll go into the feature manager and show you what this actually does. This is the thing called Azure App Configuration, and it's a way to manage feature flags. So feature flags here, I have a few. Some of them are used for this presentation, some are not. There's one called beta right here. If I click on this and enable it, it tells me up here that the feature flag has been updated. Now I've actually turned on a new feature in my application. Sometimes it takes a second. There we go. So when I refresh, it shows me a little bit image here that is a feature that I've set up for this particular application. I can go back here and I can literally just turn this off, and that feature will be off as well. There is a way to set this up with percentage as well, so that people who see the site only see it once in a while. I'm just refreshing the, oh, there we go. Let's get rid of that. Sometimes it takes a second to refresh. We'll come back to that. There we go. It's gone. As you can see, you can turn off and on features just by clicking on the feature manager. Of course, this is a really simple example, but you could do some other things, like maybe you have a product catalog and you want to introduce some new products, and you only want half the people in the website to see the new products, and you want to watch what the behavior is based on the old version of the website versus the new version of the website. You could set this up as a percentage to control that, and then only half the people will see the site. Or you can literally just turn things on and off. Let's say you just want to have a feature that is enabled for a specific time, you can do that in Feature Manager, in the app config in the Feature Manager. You can set up a feature to be time boxed so that it only starts on May 10th and closes on May 11th. So some cool stuff. I'm going to show you how we actually get to this spot. I'm going to start with a blank today. I actually have a blank web app, this one here. It's called Reactor GitHub 2021-05-17. I just set it up yesterday. And if we go to the URL for that website, you'll see that it just uses an intro. Hey, Java developers, this is a completely blank web app. Now let's go into that and I'll show you what I did to set it up. And what we're going to do is we're going to take GitHub and we're going to deploy out to this app. So inside of here, if I go into my configuration, in the general settings, I've set this web app up as Java 11, and I set this up in advance because sometimes it takes a few minutes to spin up, and we only have an hour for the presentation. So Java 11, Java SE, I could put a startup command in here, which is something like this that says how we're actually going to start the application, but I'm going to let the deployment actually control that today. We make sure in this case that the app is always on, and that makes sure it doesn't get idled out due to inactivity, which is very handy for presentations and for e-commerce websites and things like that. If it does get idled out, it's actually a cost-saving measure because you don't get charged when things are not running on Azure App Service. Okay. So that's basically the general settings. There's a couple of specific application settings that I set up. And I mentioned that last week I had some problems with one of the demos I was working on. And here's a good way to set that up. A little tip for you. Inside of here, in the application settings, I've got a connection string. And that connection string is actually what points to the feature manager that I have set up. It's an environment variable that only works with this application. It's encrypted at rest. It's very handy. But this is the one that was tripping me up last week. The website container start time limit, the default was a little bit low. After a few, I think 30 seconds, it was shutting down. So I just put the maximum value of 1800 because we know we want this website to work and we know the code works because I wrote it. Would never fail. And I just wanted to make sure that everything works. So you set up a website's container start time limit. You set up the value of 1800, which is the max. That's 1800 seconds, and it should start within that period of time. Last week, it's when you're doing a deployment for Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions or something like that, there is a period where the deployment is deploying, and then there's a period where the app restarts, and during that time sometimes things can time out, and that's what I was experiencing in that particular situation. So I've just maxed out the container time start because this is a demo, so why not? And we know that code works, so we know that we don't want it to time out if something goes wrong. We want to make sure that everything's working and running, and it's just a simple demo app, so there's no reason to have a low timeout on that. So anyway, that's a little tip. You can set up the website's container start time limit when you're working with Java, and that will, and set it to 1800, and that will ensure that your application gets started before it times out. All right, moving on. So what we're going to do here with this application, as I mentioned before, I don't have any changes, so that's okay. This is the URL for the site. But what we want to do is we want to actually deploy this from a GitHub repo. So the repo we're going to use today, by the way, all of the things that I'm talking about today are at DevOps for Java Shop. So you go to aka.ms/DevOps for Java Shops. You will actually see all the steps that we're going through today and the steps we went through last week. And you can follow along, and you can actually, if you're interested in presenting this to your organization or anywhere else, please do get in contact with me. Twitter handle Benz. You can reach out to me any way you like, and I can help you get set up for this. I work for a group at Microsoft called Scalable Content. And scalable content means that we actually support people who want to deliver content that we've developed in other venues. So that's actually part of my job. But anyway, there's 7 exercises in this workshop. If I go to this particular exercise, this is the one we're going to work on today. We're going to deploy an Azure Web App using the Web App Deployment Center and GitHub Actions. We're going to look at the workflow results. It's going to fail the first time. Then we're going to set up an app config connection string. We're going to rerun the deployment and it should work at that point. And these are all the steps in detail, but I'm going to actually show these to you. So let's just get started with that. The code we're using for this is part of the workshop. If you go to aka.ms/DevOps for Java Shops, you'll find that instructions. You'll also find a reference to this repo, which is DevOps for Java Shops dash test feature flags. And that is basically code that you can use to run. That's the code that I showed you just a few minutes ago with the bit. It's feature flag enabled and it's ready to run right now. So we're going to start at the application, back to the Azure Dashboard, and we're going to start at the Azure Web App. When we're in the Azure Web App, we've got everything configured the way I showed you before with the app configuration and the timeout set. It's set up for Java, so I've already done all that part. So now all we need to do is go into the deployment center and connect this GitHub repo with this web app. So let me show you something. I'm going to go back into the GitHub repo real quick, and I'll go to settings, and you'll see in settings something called secrets. Inside here, there are no secrets right now, nothing up my sleeve, but there will be in a second. So let's go back there, back into the Azure portal, and we're in the web app, and we clicked on Deployment Center, and we're going to choose the code source. GitHub, Bitbucket, or local Git are your 3 options here. And this is the automated sort of quick start system. There's ways to manage this manually if you have another source besides one of these 3. But for the purposes of this demo, we're going to do it simple. So GitHub, we're going to choose the organization. In this case, the organization is me because the repo is on my GitHub account, not a Microsoft's account. Then we're going to choose the repository, and I have quite a few repositories in here, but we're going to go down to DevOps for Java Shops, test feature flags, and we're going to choose the branch. The branch is going to be main. That's one of the cool things about this. If you're using a test server and you have a test branch, you can choose the test branch from here. We're going to do the runtime stack. We already set this up in the app config, but just to confirm it, runtime stack is going to be Java. It could be .NET, Node, Python, or Java. And the version of Java, we have several versions available, 11, 8, and 18. So we're going to go with 11 because that's a long-term support version right now. And what this does, it creates a YAML file. And this YAML file is used to actually do the deployment. But let's just do a save here. And it's successfully set up GitHub Action. So great. So everything's there. Now, if we go into our application over on GitHub, we go into settings, we're going to see a couple of things. We're going to see a secret that is here. That's the published profile that was created 18 seconds ago. That is what connects this application to our web app. Then if we go into actions, we're going to see that there is a triggered action. I've got a few here that I've disabled because I was testing it earlier. But this particular one is adding or updating the app service deployment. And this is going to be a build. It usually takes a minute or 2, but this one's actually going to fail. And why is it going to fail? If we go into our configuration here, as I mentioned before, I've got an app configuration connection string as part of my application settings. The reason for that is it connects to the feature flag. Now, what happens in the actual repo? There it is, it failed. The GitHub action actually tries to run this application. It checks it out. And I'm going to go into the details of this after when we get it working. But it checks it out, literally checks it out from GitHub, creates a clone, and then tries to run it on something called runners. And it goes through the entire build of the application to make sure it'll work in the runner before it actually gets deployed. So there's nothing wrong with the code, but we don't have that connection string in here from our runner to the feature flag that it needs to actually make this code go. So what do we do now? We're actually going to set up another secret. And that secret is going to tell us, tell the runner where to find the feature flag inside of an environment variable. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, let me close this again. Just a moment here. I'm lost. The deployment, of course, didn't work. There we go. Let's just get out of there. So we go back in here. We go to settings. And we're actually going to go into secrets. And we're going to create a new secret. New repository secret. I've done this a few times, so I've got the connection string name already set up. Bear with me while I get the value. All right. Okay, I had it right here. Here it is. All right. I'll be deleting this secret after. So basically now I've got the secret in here, and if I want to update it, look at that. It's not there. This is a way, it's encryption and encryption at rest. So this is a way to share things just with this repo. It's a public repo, so we don't want to give everyone the connection string. But if we want to build things from this repo, we do need that connection string for the build. So this is the way you do it. You actually set up the secret. The secret is there. It's hidden. You can update it by pasting something new in, but you can't actually view that. The other way to fix it is to remove it if you need to, and then recreate it. So that secret is in there, but there is one more step we need to do, and that is we need to create a little script inside of our action. So if we go into our code over here, in this repo, you can actually see the workflows here. And in this case, the one that we just created 4 minutes ago, we actually need to add something just here under name. So we're going to edit this file. This is not something necessarily commonly recommended in GitHub, but in this case, because we're working on a action which only runs on this repo, it's okay to do that. So what we did is we set up that environment variable in the secrets, and now we're going to reference that environment variable inside of our secrets, just like that. That's how you do it. App configuration connection string, and then the value is a passed variable called secrets.app configuration connection string. Couldn't be more simple. So then we have options here. In this case, we want to update the main branch with our code because we're only changing the action. That's okay to do. It's not necessarily recommended to change your code in the repo if there's a lot of people working on it, but it's okay here. I can also create a new branch for this because that's a safe way to do it. In a real world situation, you'd probably want to create a new branch so that if people are working on the main branch or whatever branch you're working on now, you're not going to have merge conflicts later. So let's commit that change. All right. So now if we go into our actions, we're going to see that this is running and the build is happening. So while that build is happening, let's have a look at that code and see what it does. So here's the YAML file. Zoom in a little so you can read that. All right. So basically, in this particular case, it's just named build and deploy jar app to Azure Web App and the name of the actual script. And that's the name of the web app that we're deploying to. It automatically added that when we were in the Azure Deployment Center. Next thing we do is we set up an environment variable, which is the connection string. And if there's a push into this repo, a commit, anything that gets saved into this repo via push on the main branch, then it starts this workflow. And I mentioned before, there's 20 plus triggers that you can use for actually triggering activity. It could be a push, it could be a pull request, could be a few different things in this case. This is the runner that we were talking about. So the GitHub Runner, we're going to use Ubuntu latest to actually run this. And then we use, we check out the repo. So you check out the repo itself. You set up a clone, you set up a Java version inside the runner, and then you build it with Maven. Okay, now if I wanted to skip that step, I could, but I want to make sure that my code works before I put it in the app service. In a real world environment, you really want that. You don't want to actually have code that hasn't been tested or built being passed into your repo. So we're going to build it with Maven. It's going to create an artifact. That artifact is going to be in a GitHub workspace under the target directory, and it's just called jar, app.jar as a matter of fact. And it's going to run on Ubuntu latest for the build, for the actual, sorry, there's one, this is the steps, this is the actual build, this is the deploy. For the build, for the deploy, we're going to run on Ubuntu latest again, another runner, and we're going to deploy this out to the web app URL. You're going to download the artifact from the build job. Then you're going to deploy it to Azure Web App using the published profile that we created earlier using the deployment manager in secrets. So then it just publishes that out. And let's have a look at the progress here. Actions. All right. Okay, so it worked this time. Let's go in there and see what that did. So basically the build worked. This time there was no error. Last time there was an error with build with Maven because we didn't have the connection string built in there. It's a very long script there, so don't necessarily want to show you all that. Okay, so next thing we do is we upload that artifact, and it gives you a little log of what it did. Set up the cleanup, check out the code, and then complete the job. And if we go to the deployment step, sets up the job, downloads the artifact from build because it was a successful build. The other one, if you recall, it stopped at the Maven build and it didn't do the deployment process because it didn't need to bother trying. The app didn't work. And here's the service application URL that we can use. It's here as well. So if I click here, now instead of getting that welcome to Java page we got with our web app before, now we're actually getting this white label error page, which is good. So from there, I can just say welcome. And there's our app. So our app is running. One of the cool things I can do as well, I kind of showed this a little bit last week, but I can go in behind the scenes and you just put the term S or the word SCM in between the name of your website and AzureWebsites.net, and you get this little environment which is Kudu, where you can actually look at things, including the app.jar, which is in the www root directory. The deployment actually had an instruction on how to set that up and run it using the Java jar command. So we didn't need to set that up. You can also see the deployment logs here. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into the actual app. So that's the app itself. As I mentioned before, it's connected to the feature manager. So if I go back into my Azure Dashboard and go to my feature manager, and I turn on beta right there. And I refresh this a couple of times. There we go. So we have our new feature. So the feature flag works, everything's working, the app works, and everything's been deployed. Now, a couple of different options I can do. There are times when you might want to work with this directly and restart it. If you do want to restart it in here, you go into your GitHub repo, your Azure Web App, apologies, and you go into configuration and general settings, you add a startup command here. In this case, you want to use that reference that I just found in the kudu, Java jar home site, www.rootapp.jar, and then you want to open up port 80 for that. And if you save that, it's actually going to refresh the app service commands for doing that. And that way, anytime you reset this app, the Java jar command will start up. If you don't do that, then you have to do the deployment each time. So there might be times when you want to change the configuration here. And in that case, you want to put that startup command into the actual app as well. All right, so that's basically the app I want to show you. That's pretty cool. So let's go in and turn off. If we go back in here, we can turn off we can get rid of it just by turning off the beta. And as I mentioned before, you can set this up so that half the people see the site, half the people don't see the site. You can adjust that. So, in a typical canary scenario where you want to try something out, you might deploy out to 10% of the people. And then you might want to deploy out to 20, 30, 40, and just increment it up. The way you do that in Feature Manager is if I go into the application itself, here's one that I've already set up. You can actually you could literally cut and paste this JSON here, and it will do 50% percentage, or there is a little interface you can use for setting up your feature manager as well. But I'm not going to do that right now because it's just me. It doesn't necessarily always work. It's got sticky sessions. So what happens is once I go in to one version of it, it will stay on that version constantly because that's what you want. You don't want it to flip through different versions depending on if it's an e-commerce website and the user clicks on one page, you don't want them a second later to see the other page, and then next time they click to see a different page as well. You want to keep it consistent when you're doing the 50-50 or whatever percentage you're doing. But you can turn it on and off, so that's kind of handy. All right, so I mentioned before a little bit of collaboration as well. So I've got something to show you there, which is Teams and Visual Studio Code in action. So what this is a little quick demo, and basically what happens here is it's a pre-recorded video because it requires some collaboration, and basically I've got a problem with my app. I'm going to phone a friend. That person is going to have a look at my code. We're going to fix it, and we're going to do a deployment. So let's go into that. So there's the video. So basically, this is the Tailwind Traders website that I showed you at the beginning, but I've forked it. So this is my own personal fork, and then I cloned it to my local machine. Sorry, my phone there. When I clone it to the local machine, I want to change something here. So I actually changed some of the code, and this is going to trigger a GitHub action. What I've done is I changed the code for deployment. I want to change it to staging versus production. So I've got multiple servers here. I make one small change. And then when I go into GitHub Actions, it's going to fail. almost like we planned it. And the problem is the staging environment has some requirements that just don't work. So the deployment to staging is not working. Sorry, it's a little pixelated there. But we look at the code, we look at Maven, and we see that there's something wrong with a node that we're, some wrong with a process of this. This is the node. And inside of there, we decide we're going to call a friend. We start a collaboration session, first of all, and that gets us a link. Inside that link, we can share with somebody. I'm going to call my buddy Zach, and I'm going to give him in the chat the link to my collaboration session on Visual Studio Code. Inside of Visual Studio Code, if he clicks here, he'll be in his Visual Studio Code. I'll be in mine, but he can actually edit my code, and I can see him editing, as you can see there, as we go ahead. So there's Zach. He's looking at my code. He says, yeah, okay, so it was a node issue. You need to roll back to version 10 of Node to make this work in your staging environment. So I'm like, okay, all right. So he actually makes the change, and he can submit this through GitHub on my local machine. But it does actually automatically create a message that says that Zach co-authored this. And you can see it there up in the top left, changed to Node 10, co-authored by Zach. So now it's going to deploy out to that website. All right. And there's the Tailwind Traders app that I showed you earlier. So yeah, it actually deployed it. It worked. And the whole idea here is you can do some pretty cool things with collaboration. So before we review, I did want to mention, I'll probably have some time at the end of this to show you a couple of things that happened in the last time for the previous demo. So let's go into that real quick. So I'm going to go back to my dashboard in Azure, in Azure, in the Azure portal. And if I look at staging, so last time we had a problem with this, and the problem was this configuration I mentioned before. This timeout, it just timed out because we were working with Azure DevOps, and we deployed that out. Azure DevOps just choked basically on, I don't know if it was Azure DevOps or the app service itself, but something during that process just took too long to run. And the application was timing out. So it was a little bit of an unfortunate situation, but it is working now. And if I go here, that's a good message to get. So that's the staging that I was having problems with before. And it's controlled, by the way, by the same feature manager that the GitHub demo that I showed today is controlled by. So when I turn on and off this particular setting in my feature manager, it actually updates a whole bunch of things. So you can see that there's a lot of power in the feature manager itself. If you have, this is a very simple example, but if you have 10 or 20 different features and you want to try them all out on different applications, you can set them up here. Or you might have one feature in multiple applications. So you have a website that's different languages, but it has all these different features. You can literally just click here, and all the places that this application runs, could be running a Kubernetes, a VM, anything. As long as the code references back to this feature manager, it's actually going to turn that feature on or off based on whatever you decide here. So I could do a little click on beta here, and that could have a ripple effect in multiple applications. Which is kind of cool. That just gives you an idea. So if I turn it on here, then I go into I already showed you the site working with the stage. This is actually the staging. So there you go. So it runs there, but it also runs on, that's the same one. Here it is, on the GitHub repo that we just tried. So There it is. So as you can see, you can control different things with the feature manager, which is kind of cool. And you can turn it on and off with different percentages. There's also other custom things I mentioned before, time boxing and some other things you can do to control what features are displayed when and where. But you can create multiple features, or you can have one big feature that gets everybody just by one click of a checkbox is turned on for every application in your organization as well. And that's kind of cool. You can have some fun with Easter eggs and things like that too. All right. Well, that is all I had today. Let me just do a quick review here. I did want to take questions, so I left a little time for that. So we covered what is DevOps, people, process, and products. We actually talked about keeping your investments, in this case, keeping your investments of applications. Maybe you have something in GitHub or apps. And then I showed you some DevOps in action, a couple of demos there where you went over how you would actually set up and connect a Azure Web App to your GitHub using GitHub Actions. And I went through the details of what the YAML looks like. There's a docs alert here. So Akka MS DevOps Resource Center is where you find a lot of general DevOps resource information. And then Akka MS Azure DevOps Docs is where you can find docs specifically for Azure DevOps, Azure Pipelines, and GitHub Actions as well. And that is the presentation I had today. One thing I guess I can show you now. Emma, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience, or are there? Hello. Hey.
Hi, Brian. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. I think
Yes.
my connection's a little shaky. But thank you for an excellent session. Everything ran super smoothly as well. I didn't see any questions come through, although we do have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So if there are any questions, do feel free to drop them into the comments.
Yeah, and while I'm here, let's do some search. I'll just do a quick search on GitHub Actions. Blah, blah, blah. So GitHub Actions is, let's see, the GitHub Marketplace. We've got a couple of different things here. We've got some cool documentation you can look at, but I actually wanted to find the GitHub Marketplace as well for Actions. I think that's not it. Look at that, GitHub Marketplace. That's an ad. We have a lot of docs for this. I didn't have a link prepared. GitHub Actions Marketplace. There we go. So the GitHub Marketplace is actually where you can find not only actions, but extensions as well. So for example, Docker login, I'm just looking at the actual site itself. I searched on GitHub Actions Marketplace, and that's where you find these. There's 8,461 GitHub Actions right now. So if you need something like uploading to Google Storage or deploying to a CloudFormation stack, we're all friends here. We can deploy from anywhere. This is GitHub provides this. And by the way, Azure Pipelines also has deployments to AWS and Google. So in case you're using a multi-cloud setup, you can do that kind of thing. Here's a couple of Red Hat actions as well. There's tons of actions here you can use. If you want to log into OpenShift from GitHub Actions and deploy things directly out to OpenShift, here's a way to do it. There's just so many actions that you can use. There's also extensions as well. So apps are basically similar. If I search for Azure Pipelines, for example, this is an extension written by Microsoft. And I showed you today in GitHub how you can connect a GitHub repo with GitHub Actions to connect to an Azure App Service. This is something similar. So this is Azure Pipelines. So Azure Pipelines will connect to your GitHub repo. If you want to do something like I showed in the last session, which is a multi-stage pipeline with a staging server that manually deploys using approvals to a production server and things like that, you can do that very well inside of Azure Pipelines. So this is a way to actually connect your GitHub repo with your Azure Pipelines operation as well. So that's one that's written by Microsoft. And let me see, how many more? Let's see, let's check out Marketplace. Microsoft. So there's Microsoft's Teams notification. I mentioned before working with Teams. So you can actually have something like, and we use this a lot actually, the Microsoft Teams integration with GitHub. What happens is if you have a pull request or if you have a commit or a push to production, you might want to track that in Teams. You might want to track that also in Azure Pipelines, in an Azure board. So you can actually create an Azure board entry that says this particular commit was made based on something that I built into my Azure boards, which are Kanban boards. So it'll follow you through the whole life cycle development. When you create a task in planning, you assign that to a developer and that developer posts the code to staging. You can include that in the Kanban board as a stage or a step that you're using inside of your process. You can also do that in Teams. So if you just have a Teams chat for a particular application that everybody watches to see if something's happening with this application, you can control what GitHub tells Teams. So, for example, if I'm the guy who has to do a build and a release out to production, I don't need to necessarily remember, oh, I'll tell everyone in the team that I just did this. The Teams integration would automatically send a message to the Teams chat that we're all using and tell it, hey, I just finished this commit and here's the result. That kind of thing. So that's the sort of thing you can do. Let's see, what else we got here? Container registry. So Azure has its own container registry similar to Docker Hub. Docker Hub is actually open source. And we have our own private container registry that you can use to deploy your own things inside your organization, inside of your identity management, whatever you use for your organization. That's kind of a cool one as well. So you can actually have things deploying directly to a container registry. And inside that registry, by the way, it supports the Docker build command. So you can post something to the container registry, you can have it built, and then you can check the results of that build and see if that needs to be dealt with in any way. If there's a problem with the container registry build before it actually gets deployed, you'll get notified of that as well. So that's kind of cool. I don't know. There's a few others as well. So you get the idea here. There are a lot of, there's 47 Microsoft actions. So Microsoft's actually not a big contributor to this. Let's check out Red Hat. One of our big Java partners. Oh, no, there was several for Red Hat. There we go. So it's just Red Hat all one word. How many? They have 11. Okay, so there's different ways to log into things, pushing to a registry in OpenShift, a few other things you can do. So anyway, I think we can wrap it up there. Let's leave it at here. Just want to say thanks for joining. That's the hour. It's 2 minutes before the hour. I guess we didn't have any questions, but if you do have any questions, please do reach out to me on Twitter, Benz, and I'll follow you back as well. And check out the other 2 sessions that we have. Next week, we have Rory Preddy. Rory's going to be covering the next 2 sessions, and he's going to deep dive into Spring and some of the new features that we've built into different apps and different app services and capabilities, including our Azure Spring Cloud, which is our Kubernetes service. And then he's going to show you a lot of cool GitHub tips and tricks that are things that are new as well. So, all right, so join us for that. So Emma, are you still there? I guess we're going to wrap up in about 40 seconds. Actually, 20 seconds. Looks like we're counting down. So thanks everybody for joining. I think we might have lost Emma. Hopefully she's okay. Not sure what happened there. Anyway, we're at the hour, which is the end of the broadcast. Looks like we're still live though. So I will leave it at that. I'm going to sign off at this point and leave you with the contact info. So my name is Brian Benz, Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. And this is the third of 5 sessions for DevOps for Java Shops. We'll see you next Tuesday, same time, same place. It's actually 8 a.m. Pacific. And we'll see you then. Rory Preddy will be on. I'll be there to provide moral support. Thanks. See you.